In this video, I'm going to attempt to do some bottom end work without removing the engine out of a 1989 to 1993 4th generation Honda Accord. So first off, I'm going to start this thing up so that you can see why I'm going to be pulling the engine out. So needless to say, if you got a knock in the engine and you can see your crankshaft pulley vibrating and bouncing around, that sucker's gonna have to come out. First thing we're gonna do is take out the battery.
One of the primary things you're going to want to do is to establish what kind of engine you have.
Say a 4-cylinder inside a 2nd generation Toyota pickup is going to be a 22RE. A V6 inside a 2nd generation Toyota pickup is a 3VZE. You're going to want to find out the name of it. If you look right down here, little bit of engine education for you. In the 4th generation series of the Honda Accord, you have the F18, the F20, and the F22.
In preparation for all of this work, you can see I've already taken the hood off.
Hood bolts should be 10mm, assuming you haven't bought some really beat up hand-me-down from a 17-year-old, and assuming, again, that he hasn't changed a whole bunch of stuff. Your battery tie-down bolts going here and here should also be 10mm.
Now that the battery's unhooked,
we're going to jack up the vehicle and drain the oil. Now, you don't have to drain the oil right now, but I think it's going to be easier to do it now rather than later, so that's what I'm going to do. For those of you that don't know what these parts are called, this is an oil drain pan. That is a floor jack, which is rated at 3 tons. That'd be 6,000 pounds. This is a jack stand. Now, I don't yet know if I'm going to need to remove these wheels or not, but I'm just going to do it just in case. Plus, it'll give me more room to slide underneath the vehicle so that I can use the drain pan. Now again, I don't know if these are stock lugs or not, but I'm going to be using a 19mm.
And don't worry if you've already taken your tires off of the ground,
because you can just get a little block of wood or a concrete block or something and shove it under there, so that when you're turning the lugs, it won't turn the tire. You never know when you might need it, so I'm going to give you the information about these wheel studs. 12mm diameter and a 1.5 metric thread pitch. Now, in previous videos I've stated how to tell the difference between the front of the engine, the back, the side, etc. What we're going to do with this, we're going to keep that same principle, driver side, passenger side. Normally this engine, if it was in a rear-wheel drive vehicle, wouldn't be facing this way, it'd be facing this way. So what we're going to do, instead of calling this the front and that the rear and this the passenger and that the driver, we're going to say the intake side for the rear, the exhaust side for the front, the what would be the front side if it was facing the other way, driver side, and the passenger side. And that is relevant because on the driver's side, underneath the vehicle, on the intake side of the engine, that's where your oil plug's going to be. Right up here. So, on the intake side of the engine, there's your oil plug. I was weirded out to find that it's not a 12 or a 14 or anything, it's actually a 13. And that's weird because on your average 2nd gen Toyota pickup, you're working with a 10, a 12, or a 14mm. But I guess Honda just had to be different. So, after draining the oil pan, what I've done is I've come over here to the exhaust. I needed some WD-40, an impact wrench, and a 14mm socket in order to get the 3, one at the top, one on the passenger side, one on the driver's side, in order to loosen this thing up because I'm going to have to pull this front section of exhaust off, which is going all the way up to the head of the engine. just so that I can get to this oil pan. So, now that I've got these 3 bolts out of this flange, I'm going to push this metal plate this way, and I'm going to pull this rubber piece this way so that I can disconnect these two. And that just requires a little bit of wiggling and force. Now, looking out to the front of the engine, there's the oil pan. Up on top, you're going to have this thing right here. It does have an electrical plug up there, but right now I can't figure out how to get that damn thing attached. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to unscrew this. And in order to do that, I'm going to need my 22mm wrench. I had to go to my local auto parts store to get this thing because you're not going to find a big wrench like this in a standard wrench set. And just like everything else that's rusted onto this car so far has been a pain in the ass to try to get out. This did take a little bit of force. Hopefully those threads let go before that cable twists too much. Come on, yes. Now later I can try to figure out how to unhook that damn thing, but for now that's done. Oh, I see we got another little bolt right here, right next to the drain plug. Now that we've got our oxygen sensor taken out, here's our oil plug again. Right here, you don't want to take out these bolts, you want to take out these 2 bolts. Reason you're going to do that is because this bolt is being held in with a pressed in pin. If you take those bolts out here, you won't be able to slide the exhaust forward so that you can come down. So if you just take out these 2 bolts up here, you'll be able to drop it straight down. And those bolts, for the record, are 14mm. And again, for the record, they are bolts, not nuts. These are nuts, those are bolts. So now that we got those bolts out, I'm going to take off this other little bracket here. It's going all the way across. The bolts that are holding this one in are 14mm. And those suckers required a lot of force to try to break them loose, so be prepared for that. So with the 3 loose on the front, let's just call this a crossmember. I don't know what it's actually called, we'll just call it a crossmember for now. Here's your transaxle. Here's that rubber exhaust mount. We have 2 of those bolts in the back. And here's what those bolts look like after you take them out. Looking from the front of the vehicle toward the back, here's what our crossmember looks like. Back to the front of the engine up on the top, we've got our heat shield we need to take off, 12mm bolts. In addition to the 2 bolts that you can see, there's also one down there. You might have to use a wrench because there's not very much room to get a socket down in there because we have electric fans on the radiator. It's the only design flaw I don't like about these Hondas. When you got your Toyotas, you got your Chevys, everything, the engines are facing this way instead of this way. So you can actually have a fan on the front of the engine that actually turns and cools the engine off as it's running. With these things, you're relying on the electric fans. If the battery goes dead, power cuts out. If these things burn out, there's absolutely nothing cooling your engine off. I have had that happen before. And what a wonderful experience that was. Pressure builds up with all that hot coolant, blows the radiator cap off at 80 miles an hour on the interstate, that thing's gone forever. All that boiling coolant goes splashing onto the engine, onto your exhaust, and instantly vaporizes into a white cloud of smoke for all the drivers that are behind you. So now they're crashing and killing themselves. Hashtag Honda. So now we got 2 choices. We can either take off all of these bolts that are holding on the exhaust manifold to the head, or we can come down here to the end of the manifold. There's the backside of a bolt there, backside of a bolt there, and I assume there's one right down there as well. Because of my past experiences with 4-cylinder engines like this, with the bolts that extrude out, I'm going to go ahead and try to do those 3 bolts down there instead of trying to do these 9 up here. In any event, if you choose to do these 9, these are 12mm. And on the back side, these bolts look like they're going to be 14mm. And in order to get to them, I'm going to need a 1 foot long extension. Front of the vehicle, rear of the vehicle. Once that's all done, and for the record, these are 10mm. And I suspect that the instant that I pull this pan off, I should see a loose connecting rod or something. Tighten that sucker up and I should be golden. Now, on the passenger side of the transaxle, which is right next to the oil pan, you're going to have to take off these. It looks like there are just 3 of them in order to get to the last 2 bolts of the oil pan. And those bolts are 10mm. And if you remove just the bolt on the exhaust side and the bottom side, leave the one on the intake side, it'll just hang there out of your way. Now, after 300,000 miles of abuse, you might have to pry this thing off a little bit, get that gasket to break its hold. I don't see any metal flake reflecting back. Just so that we don't damage it, this is your dipstick on the driver's side of the engine, kind of on the exhaust side. So let's go ahead and pull that out so we don't end up ruining it. Power steering pump, alternator, exhaust manifold, dipstick. Now, this is our oil pickup tube. This little metal shield here, I believe this is called a windage tray. And that looks like 10mm bolts holding it on. And now, there's our exhaust again. This is the driver's side of the engine. You see our oil pickup tube here. We're going to have to undo those 2 nuts. Now, with our oil pump pickup tube and our windage tray out of the way, we're going to focus on whatever the hell this stuff is. I assume they're oil rails or something. I have no idea. Well, hey, give me a break, you know? I mean, this stuff isn't on the bottom of a big block or a small block Chevy, so I have no idea what the hell it is. So, I'm visually inspecting the bottom of the cylinders, trying to see if I can find anything that might be worn out, might be giving me an indication as to why my crankshaft is bouncing around. I got no metal shavings in the oil, so nothing's worn out. I assume that the bearings are good. I didn't hear any squealing or scraping or anything. All these connecting rods, they look like they're tight, so everything looks fine. It's possible I might just have a really bad bearing inside the harmonic balancer here. So you might be thinking, well, hey, you just took that engine apart for nothing. Well, not necessarily. I mean, I'd rather know for a fact. Oil's good, everything's tight and together. So, that means my only culprit right now that I can think of will be a bad harmonic balancer. See if I can replace that pulley, see if I can find another one online. In any event, I hope this video has been educational for you. No other videos on all of YouTube that I have found have actually displayed any knowledge about the F22, the F18, or the F20 series engines, so hopefully you have learned a little bit of something about this if you ever buy a 4th generation Honda Accord. Hopefully this will help you out. If you're having an issue similar to mine, you'll be able to diagnose it and maybe take the bottom end apart and see if you got anything loose. Hopefully you do, and then it's just a simple fix from there. If you don't, then you're going to have to diagnose it and run through possible other problems just like I'm doing.